Hi everybody, welcome to CompuScholar's Professional Development webinar for November and December of 2019. Today we're going to talk about online integrated development environments and explore how those might be useful in your classroom. If you've seen any of our previous webinars, you know who I am by now, but briefly, my name is Chris Just. I'm the president of CompuScholar. I've had quite a bit of experience in the software engineering industry, as well as writing curriculum here in the K-12 space. And I'm always happy to answer your questions. You're welcome to email me at chris.just@compuscholar.com. So today we'll start off with a brief comparison of local versus online IDE features and get you thinking about how the different types of IDEs will sometimes behave differently and support different sorts of things. We'll talk about some key online concerns and things that you need to look out for when you select an online IDE. And then we'll take a walkthrough of a couple of different common online IDEs and wrap up with brief notes about how you might use online IDEs in the CompuScholar curriculum environment. Alright, so what is the big difference between a locally installed IDE and an online IDE? Well, local IDE is something you might be familiar with, such as Visual Studio or Eclipse, and these are things that you would install on your local computer. With a local IDE, you can typically work offline. And when you save your projects and files, those are normally stored somewhere on your local computer, although a lot of these IDEs have connections to cloud services and online repositories that you can use as well. The local IDEs tend to be fully featured, meaning the graphical user interface has full capabilities and all the bells and whistles and things that you would want to do just as a normal user of the program. And these IDEs as well will typically support graphical programming. So in other words, if your program is trying to create a Windows Form application or a Java Swing application, of course that is supported because you're building native applications that are running right there on your computer. So by contrast, an online IDE is something that you would access purely through a web browser. So the IDE itself would be hosted through some sort of online service at a website that you would go to. Of course, you would have to have a persistent internet connection in order to make use of these online IDEs, and your projects and files are typically stored somewhere in that cloud. And then what you want to look for when you're considering a particular online IDE is, does it have the features that you need? So the nature of the online user interfaces is that they're typically a little bit more limited, and if you're trying to create a graphical program with Visual Studio or with Swing or something like that, then you might not actually be able to run those in the online environment. So you might be limited just to console I/O. So that's some key things to keep in mind. Now there are some things you'll want to look for in particular when you're evaluating an online IDE for your use. And as we just mentioned, there's a lot of features that you may or may not need that online IDE may or may not have. So again, if you're trying to create a graphical program that displays graphics on the screen, then your online IDE may or may not allow you to actually run those programs. In addition, if you have a kind of a specialty IDE, in particular the Unity IDE, then those normally are things that you would not be able to do online. So those custom IDEs, you would have to continue to install those locally on your computer and run those sorts of things locally. And then just think through some of the normal features of a locally installed IDE. These will typically let you engage in assorted debugging activities like setting breakpoints and stepping through a program. They may be focused on a particular language or support a wide variety of languages. And then again, the UI for the IDE itself will have all the bells and whistles like syntax highlighting and tooltip pop-ups and search and find and replace and refactoring and that sort of thing. So you just want to kind of take a look at the online IDE and compare it to your local IDE and see if it's going to meet your needs that way. Additionally, you do want to consider the accounts that you might need to create on this online IDE and see if those are going to be suitable for student use. So if you look at something like Eclipse, which is a locally installed IDE, you don't need any sort of accounts in order to install and use Eclipse. However, if you went online to an online service, then you would almost certainly need to create some sort of account that would require a student email address for each account. The online services may or may not cost anything, and of course you'll want to take a look at the terms of use to make sure they're suitable for students. So for example, in at least one of the services that we'll look at today, they specifically mandate that the users are 13 years of age or older. So if you have younger students, then those students would not be allowed to use the IDE. And then finally, you'll want to think through the file management and submission. So if you have students that are working in a local IDE, those students are saving their project files locally, and then they're submitting those files to the teacher in some form or fashion, either through the CompuScholar service or through a shared network drive or through some other submission means that you've set up that works well in your classroom. If the students are working in an online environment, then their files are almost certainly stored in that online environment, and you would just need to work through how exactly are you going to get a hold of those files as a teacher in order to grade them. So those are kind of the big picture concerns you'll want to think about when you're looking at utilizing an online IDE. Does it have the features that you want? Can your students use that from an account and licensing perspective? And then how are you actually going to get a hold of the student work in order to grade it? So those are kind of the main things to keep in mind. Now there are many online IDEs out there. More crop up all the time. I listed a few common ones here: Replid, Code Anywhere, and Code Envy. But if you search for Online IDE in your favorite search engine, you will be deluged with many options. Some of them are specialty IDEs that might just work for JavaScript or HTML. Some of them are more general purpose and will support a wide variety of languages. And some of them are easier to use. Some of them are very technical in nature. So you're kind of looking for something that is useful for your students. So let's take a deeper look at some of these examples. The first one we're going to check out is Replid, and this is a popular IDE that supports many languages. It also has some classroom tools for teachers that you might want to review, so it's possible for you to create assignments that are actually auto-graded by their system. So if it's console level programs, then you can ask the student to create a function and then set up some test cases around that function, so you might find that useful. It looks like this is a free service if you're in a public school or a nonprofit K-12 school, so you can apply for that free access. And of course, in terms of student accounts, students will need email addresses and click on an email verification link in order to create the accounts, and they are limited to 13 plus in years of age. So let's go ahead and check out this service now. Alright, I'm here in the Replid IDE, and I've already logged in with my test account, and the REPLs are projects. So we can go ahead and take a look at a project I've already created, and I'm trying out a Java project. Alright, in this project I've created a simple main.java file with just a main function that prints out a single statement. This is pretty straightforward, and you can click the run button to see this in action. You can see it compiling down here in the bottom right window. And finally you see the output. So this worked successfully. It was pretty easy to get something up and running. And let's take a look at a slightly more complex example. Now I've cut and pasted in some code from one of our projects. This is our Pizza Palace project, which actually does some graphical programming with Java Swing. Let's go ahead and run that and see what happens. Alright, so this is actually pretty cool. So this particular online IDE actually supports some graphical program output. You can see that here in the window. And it seems to be a fully functional graphical output window. So this is pretty cool if you're trying to do some graphical programming. I have not spent a lot of time playing with this, but just from the surface look, it seems to at least support some Java Swing. And so your mileage may vary as you try some other languages and other types of graphical output. But at least from a high-level view, this seems to be a pretty capable environment. There are a few oddities you'll want to keep track of. For one thing, your Java file needs to be called main.java, so your class with the main function needs to be called main as well. I'm not sure why they have that restriction. It seems kind of annoying, but that seems to be a fact of life here, at least at the moment. So you'll need to make your students aware of that. And then it seems to be either difficult or impossible to actually delete files once you've created them, so that's kind of annoying as well. So there might be some file management and naming issues you'll have to work through, but otherwise it seems to be a pretty straightforward environment. Alright, let's shift over and talk about the next online IDE. This is Code Anywhere, and again this one supports many languages. This is actually a paid service, so you can sign up for a 7-day free trial if you want to check it out and kind of evaluate it for free. And just like the rest of the services, if you're going to create student accounts, then those student accounts would need an email address where they can click on a confirmation link. So let's go ahead and switch over to the service now. Alright, I've logged in with my trial account, and the first thing I want to do is set up what they call a connection, which is kind of a stack of technology that you're going to be using. Let's call it My Java, and we'll go down and pick a Java stack. click Create. All right, while we're waiting for that container to deploy, we'll go ahead and create a sample file. And we'll save this. All right, we've saved it as main.java. Make sure you select this Java connection when you're in the process of saving it. And now let's go ahead and try and run it with the little run button here. So the first thing you'll notice is you actually get an error message, something about opening your container config and defining your run configuration. So immediately you can tell this is a little bit less user-friendly than the previous service that we took a look at. So I'm going to right-click on my Java container, find the config, and just try and noodle through these instructions. If you take a look at this section in particular, it says to actually go ahead and enter in the commands you need to run the project by uncommenting them, and then comment out the error message. Change this to main, which is my file. All right, let's save that, and let's go back to main.java and try and run it again. Great, it's now working, and you can see the program output. So finally we were able to get some sort of program output. Let's go back to this main class and replace it with our Pizza Palace example. Again, this is a more complicated Java Swing example. Save that file and then run it. And right away you can see we get some sort of exception because we're trying to use some X11 graphical output, and that's either not available or not configured. So that's as far as I've gotten here in terms of playing around with graphical output. So it's either not supported at all in this case, or it takes some extra configuration steps. I'm not sure which, but in terms of getting your students to use it quickly and easily, it's obviously a little bit more difficult in this service. Okay, the last service that I wanted to show you is CodeEnvy. This is actually something that hosts an Eclipse G7 developer environment. That's a new online development environment from Eclipse. It looks like they have a free developer level program. The CodeEnvy IDE was actually recently purchased by Red Hat, so in order to use this you would need a Red Hat account. So again, the same process of setting up an account and clicking on the email configuration link. Now unfortunately, when I did get that email confirmation link and clicked on it, the process just bombed out with an internal server error. And so hopefully that's something that they will get fixed up in the near future. And if you go try this yourself, it's entirely possible they will have sorted through their problems there and will allow you to create accounts. But at least at this point, the account setup process seems to be a little bit broken. So I expect that's just a transition problem as Red Hat completes their takeover of CodeEnvy. So I expect this is something that may be an option for you as soon as they get that worked out. And I would encourage you to check it out on your own and see if you can get that to work. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about why you might want to use an online IDE with your CompuScholar course. Now, most of our courses will instruct students to download and install a local IDE. So if you're doing C# programming, that's Visual Studio. If it's Java programming, it's the JDK and Eclipse. If it's Unity game development, it's the Unity IDE, and so on. We are aware that sometimes installing software locally can be problematic in a school lab. You might not have the resources or the permissions in order to install the software that you need to get installed. And so you might consider an online IDE as an alternative to installing local software. And depending on the course, that may or may not get you everything that you need. So the key here is, again, understanding the process of submission for student work. So if you identify an IDE that meets all of your needs in terms of the features, namely it can support the language that you want to teach, and it's able to support the activities either in a console level or a graphical level that are required for the coursework, then you just want to make sure that you figure out how exactly the student work is going to get submitted to you. Can they download their files and zip them up and send them to you? Is there some way that you can log in administratively in a classroom environment and take a look at their work that way? So just keep that in mind as you select an online IDE. Now, we have deployed our online coding engine in some of our courses, and so this is something that will become increasingly an option for you. So if you're not able to install software locally, we will, depending on the course, make some alternatives available to you. So for example, our new Python programming course is already fully online out of the box, so you can type directly into your web browser all of the source code that you need for all of your Python lessons and activities. And we have an auto grading feature as well for that Python course. So that's kind of the direction that we're trending. Our Windows Programming with C# course has some online IDE exercises for students within the lessons where it's appropriate. However, that course is very heavily intertwined with Visual Studio in terms of teaching students to do graphical programming. And so they would continue to need to use a locally installed IDE, namely Visual Studio, in order to do the graded projects, the hands-on graded projects. So the online IDE that we have there is something that lets students do a lot of practice code very quickly, but when it comes time to do the actual graded projects and some of the graphical exercises, they would need to continue to use Visual Studio to create local programs. The Java course is the same way. Both our abridged and AP version of the Java course now have online coding boxes within the lessons in order to do exercises and work with me projects where that is possible. In some cases, there's Java Swing that's involved, and our online IDE would not support that, so they'll continue to use the JDK and some other IDE like Eclipse for those offline activities. I have a little asterisk there, as we are trending this course continually in the direction of Python. So we expect over time this Java course will become fully or almost fully online in terms of letting students do everything without actually installing any software. We are also looking at adding the auto grading feature to the Java courses, and then the graphical swing sections would just be kind of moved towards the end as an optional exercise. So that's something to look forward to with the Java course. Our web design course, again, we are working on this as we speak. So we have already uploaded a half dozen or so new chapters in web design that provide online coding exercises directly in the web browser. Again, the nature of this course is such that the students will continue to use offline file management and text editors and that sort of thing in order to create their local websites, but we are providing some of those online coding panels within the lessons. I'll mention the Unity course, and I've hinted at this previously. So in order to do Unity game programming, you obviously need the Unity IDE, and that is a locally installed software package on your computer, so there are no online IDE options for that at this point. And then I'll toss in Digital Savvy, just listing it as one of our courses. This is not necessarily a programming course at all, and so the types of lessons and exercises that the students are doing are things naturally revolving around their local computer. So an online IDE is not necessarily appropriate here. However, this course does use many online services where they're available. So if you're doing word processing or spreadsheets or whatever, and you don't want to install something like Microsoft Office locally, then there's always an online option like Google Docs that you can use. So Digital Savvy, even though I've listed it as NA there from an IDE perspective, is indeed a course that you can do fully online without any locally installed software. So I hope this quick sprint through online IDEs, some key features and some options and things to look for, was useful to you. We'd love to hear from you about your own experience with online IDEs. So if you have a different one that you would like to recommend to us, or you want to share your experience about how you integrated an online IDE into a CompuScholar course, certainly reach out to me and we'd love to have a chat. Thanks so much for watching.